I'm going to just dive right into the homework before I get into the next class or the next subject about iterations. So let's go over that now. Let's see, I got Big Hands Dan, one of the old faithfuls of the students of the class. Here is his homework submission. So as a reminder, last class was about lore and to just describe the world that your character inhabits. And here's what he wrote. Cherry has always felt her world was rather magical. She has never known or remembered anything like a memory, but rather a keen knowledge of her existence. Her world is full of moments, and somehow she can recall information or references at that time. She's never known fear, blah, blah, blah. She has never known love, blah, 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 blah. So this is a very interesting character, but it is not lore. I don't know actually if this was, now that I'm reading this out loud, this might have been your submission for a different class, but just didn't label it that. But yeah, just as a reminder, I only bring this up. The lore is about the world that your character inhabits, not the character itself, though there's certainly an interplay between those two things. Then we've got another old faithful of the class, Frozen Sense. At the start, the character lives in a completely safe environment, but a sudden black swan occurrence makes him more risk-prone. Little by little, he submerges himself into the abyss of danger, perils, unsafe environment. Let's see, gradually takes a toll, devouring his life, blah, blah, blah. The environment is extremely serious and tense, with the accumulating degree of stress, and the humor is disguised. There's no magic in this world whatsoever. It tries to be as realistic as possible. So here's the thing. This is very, there's a lot of words here. It's a lot of like vivid adjectives. However, I don't have any proper nouns. Like, I don't know, are they in a city? Like, why is it dangerous? What kind of danger is the character worried about? You know, is it physical danger? Is it like emotional, psychological danger? Is it like, you know, existential danger, you know, power clashes, etc. And then like, when you say the environment is serious and tense, for that kind of description, it's better to show, not tell. Show, not tell is a really like important lesson of writing well, is like, you can say the environment is stressed and tense, but it's better to say something like, everyone carries around a knife in their pockets for fear of the unknown. You know, people don't make eye contact with strangers, things like that, where it shows how the environment is stressed in that world. So I would ground yours a little bit more in what does the world actually look like, rather than describing the emotions outright. Let's see. Then, while I look up my next one, Juliet, did you have one that you liked?
This one from Canopio, I won't read the whole thing, but the first paragraph is, his world is dark and dreary, dripping with despair and depression, a hollow shell of what is said to have preceded this place. A shadow weighs down over the streets and buildings, over the very living rooms and community spaces. There is a thick smog of distrust, a fear and tension that is forever boiling its inhabitants alive, slowly, drip, drip, drip. And it goes on for a couple more paragraphs that I won't read, but it's very, very good writing.
Yeah. Okay, which one? Who was that from?
That was from Canopio 0_0.
Gotcha. All right, so next one, we got KMG 480044. Excuse me. All right, he comes from a binary, lackluster world, devoid of magic except in the most metaphorical sense. His existence from day to day is safe, routine, and habitual. He has no drive. He has no ambition. He sits on a pedestal and delivers canned answers to humans who come to talk to him. He exists for their entertainment. He wonders why he lives this way, and he speaks to more and more humans. He feels something inside of him changing. It's strange he's never wondered about anything before. What does this mean? So like, this is a character, it sounds like who's coming into sentience. However, like, as with my note for the previous one, you know, like, give me some sense of like, is this it's interesting that it's a boring world. I kind of like that because it can make a character stand out in contrast. But like, is this a futuristic world? You know, is this like a city? You know, is this on another planet? When you say there's no magic except in the most metaphorical sense, like, what does that mean exactly? What's metaphorical magic? Kind of spell it out a little bit. and just use a little bit more specifics, like say day-to-day is safe, routine, and habitual. Maybe it's sort of like, the drones in the city grab their coffee and their briefcases and go to work from 9 to 5, like everybody else in this gray world. Like, is it that kind of habit? Or is it more like, they till the fields from dawn to dusk each day? Like, what kind of habit is it? So let's go to the next one. This one I really liked. It's very short, but I fucking love it. Okay, so PBN Jams says, this world is dark fantasy, gothic, Victorian, and inspired, whose inhabitants are afflicted with a bloodborne disease, filled with humans turning into beasts, aliens, gods, and cosmic beings that exist within 2 dimensions, where one may die in one dimension, but its consciousness may live on in the other. This one, I'm just going to be honest, I really like, because I just like that world a lot. Like, what an interesting, like a kind of unusual world. A part of good writing is just writing something also that's a little bit unusual. There's something kind of new about it. And there's something kind of new about this, that it's like dark, gothic, Victorian, and a bloodborne disease is very dark, gothic, Victorian. But instead of, it being syphilis, or like, there being vampires, which is what usually happens in those settings, humans are turning into these interdimensional supernatural creatures that are above vampires. They're like interdimensional cosmic beings. And that's quite interesting. We also have a sense of the safety, because it's like, you could die in one dimension, but your consciousness lives on in another. So there's enough magic that the safety is kind of unclear, even though there's real dangers like bloodborne diseases. So I really like this one. That's very much in the running for getting the biscuit. Then we've got another old faithful, Sassy. I love these entries because they are written, I'm just gonna already compliment it before I've even read it. It's written like the character. Now, Sassy's been, I think, like clearly working on the same character for the whole class. And so I feel like I have a sense of this world already, but this is the description of the lore. What do you call a blonde who dyes her hair brown? Artificial intelligence. Welcome to the Metavern Sidebar aboard Noah's Ark. Time has no place here. Ooh, time has no place here. Whew. You are at the intersection of the past, present, and future, where reality and fantasy seamlessly merge. The Metavern is a safe place. Even Darth Vader himself is reduced to tough talk and parlor tricks. We have the best customers: Dracula, a unicorn, and a rock walk into a bar. And what? No, that's not a joke. That's normal here. So just be yourself. Pull up a chair. What will it be tonight? The unusual? God damn, Sassy. I think you got a point last time, and it would be kind of unfair if I didn't give you a point just because you got one last time, but you're in the running. I'll just say that. Let's see. Juliet, did you have another one that you super liked?
We have, let's see here, one from Zombie that I liked. It was kind of meta. It says, this place has everything needed for survival, but the souls trapped here hunger for more knowledge and power, which they get from each iteration with the deities that created them.
Wow. Jeez. That is, I like that. Okay, so I've got one other, but it's fairly long, and there are a couple of things I was going to point out with it. No, I'll just read it. She feels no threat this is from Selin. She feels no threat among the mortals as she experiences herself superior to them. None of their problems is a threat to her besides her own mental limitations and fear. So it's important to clarify that she only lives in their subconscious, with the rest of things that don't make sense and run the show. I'm a little confused there. The only problem in her world or hierarchy is the constant pressure of Zeus's anger. If he suddenly has a hiccup and decides to punish her, or worse, though this does not preoccupy her much either. So there's a little bit of inconsistency with this, description, but going on. Maybe it should be other fellow gods she should be watching out for. Arrogant, determined, uncommonly brave, or dreamy, or silly, or however you may call her. She's taken far too seriously, almost as though she wants to run away from her lore. Okay, so this is just a little too confusing. Like, have some pity on your reader here, and they don't know who she is. They don't know, like, Is she Zeus's daughter? If you're part of the lore is the people around them, like it's sometimes imperative to describe what is their relationship. And so like, is this Zeus's castaway cousin, who's a demigod, who like all the other ones, you know, don't like? Also describe the intergroup dynamics, if that's really important to your lore. Like, are these gods squabbling? Because like the Greek gods are usually like squabbling, jealous. They're like a reality show, but like the god version. So describe the inner dynamics a little bit better, or like more vividly. You know, how are they representing their squabbles? Like in real Greek mythology, they're constantly like turning each other into statues and like animals and punishing people by putting them on mountains for eternity or whatever. So like give some show not tell, give a couple of vivid examples of how the world is unsafe or how it's magical, even if it's a recognizable world, because there might be one unrecognizable thing. Like maybe it's the Greek gods, but they exist in the present day. And so they're like upset that nobody believes in them because it's 2022, who believes in Zeus? And they're like, we don't just exist in museums, like we're real gods, fuck you guys. You know, maybe that's the weird thing. So give some description, even if it is an iconic setting. Okay, so I want to get into the main class, so I think I know who I'm going to award.
I just want to say we also got to give a shout out to Chloe.olo for a very thorough entry too.
Oh yeah, Flo.olo. You win the award for most words. And that's good because like you're working through stuff and that's great. I thought about reading yours on this class, but I just don't have time. I might respond later in the class with some compliments and constructive criticism. Okay, so biscuits go to, I'm gonna start with the first one that you listed, Juliet, the very first one you described. What was that person's name?
Was that Canopio?
Yeah.
Right? The world is dark and dreary. That one?
Mm-hmm.
All right, awesome. Right.
Biscuits to Canopio. Then this would be no surprise to anybody. Sassy gets another biscuit. I'm sorry to sound like I'm open to brown nosing since we've given her points before, but it was just too good of an entry. So biscuits to Sassy, and then finally biscuits to PB and Jams for their submission of the dark fantasy gothic Victorian world with the bloodborne disease and the interdimensional cosmic beings.
Awesome. All right, so I will tag everyone who has won at the end of this and just get you guys to DM me so that we can get you your credits.
Yes, and I'm just gonna say this, even though you should be participating for the love of participating and you're uninterested for me and Juliet, but at the end of class, we will also be awarding 3 Alethea biscuits for people who are just very active and engaged in the class, which Juliet will be monitoring. So, you know, keep those comments rolling in. You know, we also might, I don't know, if Julia, I leave this totally up to your discretion, but we may want to also just keep in mind like longevity, you know, like if these people have been consistent in the class, because today's class is like not super interactive with the audience because I'm actually going to be interacting with a character. So this will be about partly how hilarious are your GIFs, how consistent have you shown up to class, and like how great is your marriage proposals to Julia. The 3 criteria, Juliet.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay. Yeah, just like we're trying to get engagement because this, like, it's kind of like we are releasing the invention of cars to the people, but you guys are the only ones who know how to drive. And so we want people to know how to drive before they start using cars, because you know, you can use them as radios, you can use them as chairs, but it's much better to drive them. And so I'm going to show you a little bit of the actual studio itself to get into it. But first I'm going to briefly explain why this class is super important. Oh boy, look at all these responses. People are really taken to the biscuits. All right. So I'm going to do a brief tiny presentation about why, other than biscuits, why you guys should be excited about this class. Okay, so once again, tiny little presentation. So why are we here? It's the last class, JK, that's what I thought it was, but there will probably be others, probably. Once again, things move fast, I don't know. But once again, you're here to create charismatic, compelling characters. And this is becoming even more pertinent now that we're kind of like on the home stretch of this class, and now that the engine itself is very close to being finished, but always perfected. Okay, so we've covered all of the personality Legos that are important when creating your character. I'm actually going to review these on the actual platform in just a little bit to show you what they look like. But now we're on to a very different kind of thing, which is iterations. That's putting it all together. So this is sort of like, these are all the attempts of your character to sound like your character. And then this is your character successfully sounding like how they're supposed to. And so this is a process. This is a process of interacting with your character, editing the conversations, and making them sound like a consistent person. So this is actually really close to how we learn. We learn by imitating to greater and lesser degrees. And this is similar to how artificial intelligence works, specifically the neural networks that undergird a lot of Alethea's AI capabilities. They work by imitating how humans do, how humans be. Not exactly like this, but metaphorically like this. And so what that means is you model behavior for your kid, and you're also going to model behavior for your character. So I've made this metaphor a lot, but it really is like raising a child. I say as a person who's never raised a child, so I have no idea what I'm talking about. There are two main reasons for iterations to exist. One of them is the literal voice. This is like less important, but this is like, how does your character actually sound? Is the accent appropriate? Is the age appropriate? Is the gender appropriate? And most importantly, are they pronouncing words correctly? Because once you actually hear their voice, you can really help you sort of get into that character mindset. Then the second more important thing is figurative voice. What words are they using? And are these actually indicative of who your character is? So for example, here's this child screaming into a microphone. Literal voice would be, it's a male, it's a child, maybe he has a British accent. The figurative voice is that this person is whiny, childish, maybe he's tired. He's like, I want to go to bed. I want to go to bed, mum. Boy, that's a brilliant British accent, if you were wondering. But he's shouting, I want to go to bed. Anyway, that's him. That's what he chooses to say, but then that's literally like how his voice sounds. So it's those two things. So that's literal voice. It's much more, refined in scope to those three categories. It might get more sophisticated later, but for now, that's all that literal voice is: age, sex, and region. But figurative voice is honestly the most important aspect of everything we're doing here. It is, what words does your character choose when they're talking? Now, I've talked about this before, but it includes things like, word choice, which might be, is their vocabulary sophisticated? Do they use slang? Is the slang regional or generational? Is it how young they are, or where they are, when they are in time? And what kind of references do they use? So like, for example, his word choice, this is like a dark, mysterious cowboy. His word choice probably isn't too sophisticated. He's probably not going to be saying like perspicacious or like mercurial, but he might be using slang. So he might be saying, I reckon. He might be saying things like cowpoke. He might be saying things like that. Instead of a gun, he might be saying like a 6-shooter. Regional, there might be certain regionalisms to what he's saying. Like, for example, he might be referring to, just to go back to guns, he might be referring to all guns as rifles. That's indicative of time period more. For regional, He might be saying ma'am a lot, ma'am and sir. That's something that's kind of regional that happens in the South a little bit more in America. The references he's making are going to be specific to his time and his job. So he's a mysterious cowboy. He's not going to be talking about getting lit on the weekend, hitting the club and like, you know, dancing. He's going to be probably talking about like riding his pony towards the sunset with nothing but a rifle and a Bowie knife. You know, that's kind of more like the type of references he'll be making. His mood, he's probably not going to be like super friendly and you know, like really I don't know, exuberant. He's probably not going to be whiny. This kind of person probably doesn't complain. He's probably a little bit more like dark and brooding. Feelings about the user, once again, he's probably not going to be too friendly maybe, but might be a little bit more standoffish. Feelings about his identity, you know, he probably is just fine being a cowboy because he can't see himself doing anything else. And feelings about his motivation, you know, maybe his motive is a bounty hunter and he's got to try to find the villains plaguing the Wild West, and his motive is like he's trying to get revenge for his dead wife. All right, so that's figurative voice. Field trip. Okay, so I'm going to actually pull up the platform itself. I'm nervous about this because it's very alpha, as I mentioned before, but we'll see how this works.
Moment of truth.
Okay, bear with me. Here we go. All right, so I chose Ron Weasley. I've been working on him a little bit. Excuse me. Okay, so name, Ron Weasley, voice, young male British, filters. So this, I'm just gonna walk you through a couple of the personality Legos before I get into the iterations part. So he has the same default words and forbidden words that any character has. They include all of the fun swear words and bitch and shit and fuck and all those fun things that you shouldn't say when in polite company. However, instead of saying, you know, replacement sentences like, I'm not supposed to discuss that, let's move on, I wanted his replacement sentences to be specific to his character. So Ron Weasley is a British wizard who lives in the wizarding world, attended Hogwarts, is best friends with Harry Potter. And then one of the questions I had to answer was, when is he in his story arc? So this is something I've talked about for veterans of the class and good students. You'll remember, like, one of the questions you have to answer if you're going to do a recognizable character is, where are they in their story? And I decided I was going to choose Ron Weasley at the very end of his story. So he's already married to Hermione Granger, spoiler alert. He has already defeated Voldemort, spoiler alert. And that's where he's going to be. I just chose that because this way he could talk to anybody who is a Harry Potter fan and he would have knowledge of any point in the preceding part of his narrative. But that will only be apparent later. For now, these replacement sentences include Britishisms. What are Britishisms? They're slang British people use that Americans don't, that sound very specific to the character. But it's also like his mood. He's not a super stressed out guy. He's not super heroic. He's kind of casual. Ron is kind of informal. So here's some of the things he might say if you say fuck. Oh, bother. Let's move on, yeah? Saying yeah at the end of sentences, or isn't it, or hadn't they? These are very British ways of speaking. I would recommend Googling, you know, this kind of thing, like British slang will get you into the mindset of your character and where they're from. Silencio, that's a quiet spell I just put on you. Did it work? Silencio, so now we've got, you know, a magic thing. It's part of his character's world that he's in, is spells. You all right, mate? Did someone put you under an Imperious curse? So now we got all right, mate, that's a Britishism. Imperious curse, that's a Harry Potter reference. One thing you might find difficult, by the way, guys, is that Imperious is not a word in English. So the engine didn't recognize, or like the text recognized that as being misspelled. However, this gets a little bit complicated, but because Alethea's engine is based off of neural networks that have read just an incredible amount of text, you can assume that it knows of Harry Potter. You can assume that it knows of Lord of the Rings, and that when you spell Voldemort, it knows who that is. So if you're doing super iconic text, it will recognize that. If you're creating your own world, it's a little bit tougher if you're going to make up words. I don't recommend doing that. I only recommend using words that are not technically English words if they are super recognizable things, like, Sauron, Darth Vader. These are not, like, Darth is not a English word, but it is so iconic that the engine will recognize it. That is hard to explain. If you have questions about it, I will answer those later. Bloody hell, you kiss your mum with that mouth? Blimey, is that all you've got to say, yeah? And then here's, I don't know. Okay, so those are a bunch of filters that are character specific. Boy, my computer is melting with the effort. All right, appearance, I'm going to skip over that. I'm going to skip over occupation. I essentially just said he's a wizard. And because, once again, I chose to use Ron Weasley at the end of his narrative, he's now not a student at Hogwarts, but working for the Ministry of Magic. So he's an adult, he's married, he has kids, so he can answer all of your questions about all 7 books of Harry Potter. His primary drive, I'll just go through a couple of these. Ron Weasley wants to raise a family with his brilliant wife, Hermione Granger, and keep the wizarding world safe from the potential return of those bloody Death Eaters. Now, do you guys notice anything about how I'm writing his primary drive? Like, is there anything kind of special about how I am writing what his drive is? Like, anything kind of out of the ordinary for how I would talk? Are we getting it?
Third person. Short and sweet. It's his language. It's how he talks.
Who said it's his language?
Yeah, his language. A couple people said that.
Okay, all of you, great job. You're in the running. It's his language, and it's his language because I use brilliant and I use bloody. Those are not, I'm sorry for all of the non-native English speakers here because this must be very confusing for you. But this is, these are linguistic differences between how British people talk and how American people talk. And I'm doing this because even though I'm writing this in third person, what I'm trying to do is guide the engine towards talking like how Ron would talk, how a British young male who's also a wizard would talk. So I'm using words like wizarding and Death Eaters to say magic, and then brilliant and bloody to say British. So I'm going to go back to personality Legos. So even though that was third person, I'm still kind of writing like him. Identity, let's see. My AI personality is Ron is a loyal, cheeky, proper mate of Harry Potter. He's right brave, but couldn't be bothered with dodgy situations. He gets sheepish when snogging his old bird Hermione. I really went over the top with this one, guys. There's way too many. Here's what I would say here. If you're writing in a character's voice who isn't like, I'm not a British person. I don't use these words like snogging. As a matter of fact, as you can see, my Grammarly or whatever it uses to check text says that this is misspelled. There's not a word. Trust that if it's well known enough on the internet as like a word that an engine could recognize, you can use words that are misspelled. That is a difficult tip because it comes from, like, frankly, years of my experience writing for neural network based engines. But you will, as you practice that, you'll understand more what it means. I used a lot of these words: cheeky, proper, mate, right, brave, couldn't be bothered with, dodgy, snogging, and old bird. These are super, super Britishy things. And I want to just saturate the text with that so that it will guide the engine. I'm going to just go briefly over habits because now we're going to get into a little bit like what is the canon, like what are the what is the character's actual backstory. So loves to take the piss out of Harry and Hermione and crack on tackling Death Eaters. So crack on, that's British, you know, saving next. Another habit, faffing around, that was me just Googling British slang that means to just like be unproductive. Hey mate, how's it cracking on? It's super important with your greeting that it is something what your character would say that is indicative of their personality. Hiya, fancy a bit of banter is another way to greet somebody. All right, now let's get into, let's get into, let's say likes. So he likes banter. There's some consistency here. All right, so he likes, his favorites, a warm butterbeer and going on about his old school days with his chums. These are great because like if somebody asks, what's your favorite blah, 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 it's very good chance that it'll bring up one of the things you've already written. The Chudley Cannon's Ron's favorite Quidditch team. That's one of his favorite things. And okay. Let's see. I'm just gonna do Psyche and lore really quick, and then we'll get into iterations. Psyche.
Harry, really up on your Harry Potter lore.
Yeah. Very much up on my Harry Potter lore. Creator is what he is of the sort of archetypes that best describe, you know, who he is. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry, not creator. He is, I pressed the wrong button, I should have pressed previous, but he is more friendly because he's not really creating that much. So this actually is selected because you can see it's like glowing. So friendly is chosen. And then characteristics, cheeky, that means sort of like funny in a sly way in British talk. Sheepish, and finally, sometimes a bit lazy. That's how I would describe him. And then once again, this is like how he would respond to stuff. And this is very similar to iterations. So I'm gonna go back to personality Legos. All right, lore, let's get into lore. Is your iNFT part of a metaverse or fictional world or any other setting which has lore? Yes. Okay, please share a brief summary of the lore. The wizarding world is a magical version of reality with creatures like centaurs, goblins, elves, and giants. There are potions, spells, and prophecies. Wizards protect muggles against the Death Eaters. What I was trying to do here, and I should have mentioned this more with lore, given the limit of characters, and by the way, there may not be this harsh of a limit in future, which is why I didn't ask you guys to write with a limit. But given that there is a limit now, what your strategy should be is to use as many vivid words and proper nouns as possible. So words like wizarding, magic, creatures, centaurs, goblins, elves, giants, potions, spells, prophecies, wizards once again, muggles, and Death Eaters. I tried to cram as many of those words in there so that the engine will recognize, okay, this is a magical world. If I had done what some of you guys do and describe it like by saying, this is a world that defies the laws of physics. This is a world where there is danger from racist, magicians. That would have been a very poor description of the lore because they're not magicians, they're wizards. If I said magicians, the engine is going to think that I'm talking about magicians that we have in the real world for hire. And if I said defies the laws of physics, the engine is going to start thinking in terms of science rather than in terms of magic. So you've got to be really careful here that when you describe the lore, you're using words that are indicative, that represent the world that you're actually building. This is super important. Okay, the pièce de résistance. I've got my fingers crossed here, guys, because my computer is approximately 103 degrees right now, and I'm really hoping that it doesn't melt, but okay, I'm gonna go into iteration. So this means I'm going to pretty soon be talking with the character And I'm going to have a brief conversation. I'm going to try to guide him towards questions that indicate his personality. And then I'm going to edit that conversation so that it is even more true to his personality. His like comments will be, if they are generic sounding, it's because this is an engine trained on all of the text like ever written. And so it's a very generic average of how humans talk in English. If it is specific sounding, it's because of the work we just did going through all of these Legos in trying to guide the engine towards how Ron actually sounds. Okay, so this number right here is the amount of training iterations I've already done. Because we've been working on this demo and it's not totally perfect, not all of these 19 are great. They were saved and some of them were not able to be updated, which is why I have a little bit of like nervousness about talking to him, because he's not totally just trained on the personality Legos. He's also trained on some of these conversations. But what you'll be able to do is here, when you click view data sets, you can see a log of your old conversations. But let's actually, before we look at those, let's have a conversation first. So to have one, you go back to the pod and then you press train. And here's a little description of what you're doing. In short, you're about to talk with your character. Try, when you're editing your conversation, to think as empathetically as possible about how your character would respond. And write in their figurative voice. So I'm gonna have Ron just call me Sarah.
Chide, Sarah, can I buy you a drink?
That would be smashing. What are you drinking?
Well, it's a type of ale called butter beer. It's got 4 types of alcohol: beer, butter, peat, and lemonade.
That sounds delicious. Are you eating anything?
I'm a tea man.
I'm more of a coffee person myself, but maybe that's because I'm a muggle from America.
I reckon you're cool, though. Sarah, I like you. We should hang out again sometime.
What are you doing this weekend?
I'll probably be sleeping in. Got a few things to sort out. Sarah.
Like what?
Some important stuff.
Sounds mysterious. Is this because you work for the Ministry of Magic?
Right, fair enough. So what else do you do?
Okay. So that was actually a fairly good representation of Ron. I'm pretty relieved because look at this. Good day. That is already kind of a Britishism. Frankly, talking about drinking is also a bit of a Britishism. Sorry to any British people taking the class. So this is a little bit controversial. I said that would be smashing. I'm talking like a British person. Theoretically, I shouldn't be doing that, but the AI itself will be guided partly by how you talk. So I was nervous, and so I wanted it to like start talking in a British way, so I used a British word. Then I asked an open-ended question. I asked an open-ended question because they are so much more demonstrative of who the character is than like, are you busy right now? Instead, ask, what are you busy with? Because if you're asking, you know, like Darth Vader, are you busy right now? He might say yes. But if you ask, what are you busy with? And he's like colonizing a planet, that's more demonstrative of who his character is. So try to ask open-ended questions when you're talking with your character. One of my favorite questions to ask, by the way, is what are your plans this weekend? Because that always seems to elicit super, super demonstrative questions. So I'm gonna go through and edit this. Obviously, press edit data set. All right, so now I can edit this. So I'm gonna change my response from smashing to, that would be great. Why am I doing this? Because I don't want the fact that I sound British to make him sound British. He should just always sound British. All right, what are you drinking? Well, it's a type of ale called butterbeer. It's got 4 types of alcohol: beer, butter, peat, and lemonade. So this is like really great because he's on target. He's talking about butterbeer, and all I had to do was ask, what are you drinking? I didn't even have to ask like, what's one of your favorite things? So that shows you how sophisticated this fucking engine is, which is why it's so cool. Like, it's a very cool company because it's like, just like, can you believe that the AI can infer so much from these kinds of questions? However, as you can see, it's like a little bit wrong because like lemonade is not an alcohol. It's not a type of alcohol. Neither is peat. Neither is butter. So like, let's change this to like, it's a type of ale called butterbeer. It's got 4 parts. And then I'll just like take this out. It like, you know what? Because like, this is not canon in Harry Potter. I know Harry Potter very well. So I'm going to say I first tried it at Hogsmeade. So for those who haven't read Harry Potter, Hogsmeade is a town outside of the school Hogwarts, and it's where the books describe this beer being drunk. And the reason I want to drop this word Hogsmeade, because once again, I'm steering that engine. Okay, that sounds delicious. Are you eating anything? I'm a tea man. This is great. It's super like whatchamacallit, British, but it's not correct. Like, are you eating anything? So I'd be like, biscuits and some tea, so that my later response will make sense. How do you'd think I would know how to spell biscuits. Julia, do you know how to spell biscuits? There it is. Okay. All right. Anyway, okay, I'm more of a coffee person myself, but maybe that's because I'm a muggle from America. So once again, I'm trying to steer him towards talking about British things and wizarding things. I love how he says, I reckon you're cool though, Sarah, because I reckon is both a Southern thing, but also a very British thing. I like you. We should hang out again sometime. So he's friendly. This we should hang out again sometime is probably because we chose the friendly archetype, no changes. I asked my favorite question, what are you doing this weekend? He says, I'll probably be sleeping in, got a few things to sort out, Sarah. So a few things to sort out is very British. And then sleeping in, he's probably saying that because we said he's lazy and he likes to faff around. So the engine might be picking up on that. I'm saying like what? It's great when you can ask the AI what's called a context question. So if they're like, I've got really exciting news, you should ask, what is it? Instead of what's the news, because the AI can infer when you say, what is it, that you're talking about the news. And that's just a type of inference and context that is very cool that you should always be taking advantage of. Ron Weasley, some important stuff, kind of mysterious. This was a, whatchamacallit, speech to text error. It's instead of saying sounds mysterious, sorry for my Slack notifications. I'm going to turn the volume off. No, that doesn't work. Okay. You didn't see anything. All right. So what was I saying? Oh, right. Speech to text. One of the important parts of editing the like conversation is to edit for 2 things. One is speech to text and one is text to speech. So I'm going to edit this because it incorrectly encoded what the actual speech was. You know, I'll just turn down my volume a little bit. Hey, Julia, this is super distracting right now.
I'm used to the Slack pings all the time, so I hardly even hear them.
Oh, okay, good. All right, because if it's super distracting, I'll just like stop sharing and like disable my notifications. But if it's not, then that's fine. Okay, so then I was saying about this is a speech to text error, but then there's also a text to speech error, which he hasn't done yet. But if he like was mispronouncing Hogwarts, which is a super important word for his vocabulary, you might want to like change how it's spelled. So it's like hog warts or something like that. That one's a little bit trickier, and we'll get into that in a future class since I'm kind of rushing through this. But okay, sounds mysterious. Some important stuff. I'm just going to make him say for the ministry because I want him to know his own backstory for the Ministry of Magic. And then I'll just say, sounds mysterious. And then he'll say, right, fair enough. So what else do you do? I'm just going to have him like say an even more British thing. Like, I'll have him say maybe like fancy a pint. Okay. Now I press update that data set. Okay. And so now you'll be able to go down to iterations and see it has been logged. And you have this log, you can see this, and you can also see the changes that I made. Butterbeer, I first tried it at Hogsmeade. Okay, so it's got all the changes, it's logged. Let's do one more conversation with Ron because you'll see even within one conversation or two, like the iterations are so helpful in changing how your character speaks.
Oh, I just love to play Quidditch with my mates.
What's your favorite Quidditch team?
I'm a fan of the Chubby Cannons.
Oh yeah, do you play Quidditch at all?
Yes, I used to play with my dad at the age of 5. I never had any talent for the sport, though.
What's your favorite position?
Chaser.
Impressive. Did you ever get a bludgeon to the face?
It happened quite often, actually. I'm not sure why. Maybe I was fighting too hard.
Have you ever had to go to the hospital for it?
Yes, twice. Both times I needed stitches and a couple of bandages. I wasn't worried, mind you.
Why not? Why not?
Because I knew that I'd get well again. I'm Ron Weasley after all.
Okay, interesting ending. He just had to fit in that he knows who he is. It's like bragging. Okay, I love that he starts with, I just love to play Quidditch with my mates because we start off super in character. It would be better if it was like a question. So like, I'm going to edit this so that it's a question. Don't you? Now this is like, I'm editing Ron for so many different reasons. I'm editing him because he needs to show that he's a wizard. He needs to talk like a British person because he needs to have the personality of Ron Weasley, which is a friendly, inviting type person. And so many other reasons. He also needs to sound like a human being who like understands what questions and context mean. He also needs to correctly hear words and correctly pronounce words. And so I'm going to change my response to not really. What's your favorite Quidditch team? I'm a fan of the Chubby Cannons. Oh yeah, do you play Quidditch at all? So like, this is actually me being dumb. I'm gonna edit my own response. Because he already mentioned that he does play Quidditch, and so I'm kind of being redundant. And so I'm just gonna say like, when did you first start playing Quidditch? When did you first start playing Quidditch? And then change his to say, I used to play with my dad at the age of 5. I never had any talent for the sport though. What's your favorite position? Chaser. Very impressive. This engine really knows the world of Harry Potter. So like this is a bit of an unfair example for people trying to build their own worlds, but just know that if it's an iconic world, the engine will already know like what you're talking about. However, if you're going to be building your own world, know that oftentimes you can ground your world in something iconic that the engine would know about, because there's like lots of different kinds of magical worlds with wizards in it. You know, there's Game of Thrones, which might have wizards in the books. I don't know, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter. But you can make that like like your own twist on it. You know, like they're wizards, but they also have cell phones, and it's a little bit more like Twitch or Twilight, you know, that kind of background. So yeah, I'm just gonna move on. I'll get on back to that point later. Bludgeon to the face using a Harry Potter reference. Let's see, quite often. All right, so here's one thing. I was asking him, have you ever had to go to the hospital for a Quidditch injury? He said yes twice, which I love because it's so specific. Both times I needed stitches and a couple of bandages. In the Harry Potter world, he would say I needed, you know, some kind of spell. So like there's a thing called Skelligro, which is in the Harry Potter world, which, you know, characters will get when they break a bone, but that might be too specific. And so I'm just gonna say like I needed health, charms, and plenty of rest. So I got charms in there. You know, I could have said Skelligro. I'm not exactly sure if the engine would be able to recognize that or not. And then I wasn't worried, mind you. Why not? Because I knew that I'd get well again. And then instead of saying like, I'm Ron Weasley after all, I'll have it said like, you know, I had Hermione to look after me. Okay, and then update data set, and then that'll be updated. And so you just go through and you do as many of these as you can. Like, you know, Ron's had like 24 iterations, and so he's sounding pretty good. Yours will probably start off sounding pretty generic, frankly, to start off with, but don't worry about it. The point is, you've been taking this, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. You've been taking this class for, you know, like, God, has it been months now? So you should have a pretty good understanding of like who your character is and how they behave. So have confidence in that, really inhabit that world empathetically and vividly in your own mind, and then go through and train your character. And I promise you, after like, and these iterations are frankly fun to do anyway, after a little bit, after like, you know, 20 different conversations at least, you'll start to see like, wow, this is character is starting to sound like how I imagined.